My name is Diana. I'm 32, and I run operations for a restaurant group that seats 3,000 people a week across 4 locations. I know how a check moves from kitchen to table the way most people know how to tie their shoes. So when my parents called after 3 years of total silence and invited me to dinner to make amends, I should have asked one question before I said yes. Who's really at that table? I didn't ask. I drove 40 minutes to the Belvedere, walked through the front doors, and found 16 members of my family already seated around a long table covered in lobster tails, Wagyu steaks, and a $400 bottle of Bordeaux they'd started pouring before I pulled into the parking lot. My father looked up from the head of the table, smiled, and said what I'd spent my whole life earning. "You're paying, right? You owe us that much." He thought he'd cornered me. He hadn't counted on the 2 sentences I was about to whisper to our waiter, or on what his own credit card was about to tell the entire family 15 minutes later. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories, where ordinary people face impossible family moments and walk out with their dignity intact. If you've ever been the one expected to pay, to fix, to stay quiet, this story is for you. Drop a comment and be sure to subscribe. But let me back up a few weeks. Before the dinner. Before the parking lot full of cars I recognized. Before my father tried to hand me a bill the size of a mortgage payment. I need to tell you who I was the morning the invitation arrived, because that's the version of me they were counting on, and the version I'd already stopped being. I manage 4 restaurants. Not own. Manage. I built my way up from bussing tables at a steakhouse in Knoxville when I was 17, still smelling like fryer oil on the school bus the next morning. Hostess at 19. Server at 21. Floor manager by 24. Regional operations director by 30. I'm not rich. I have a 2-bedroom condo that's paid off, a retirement account I never touch, and exactly 1 indulgence. Sparkling water. Still or sparkling, that's what I order when I eat out, every single time. My staff thinks it's a quirk. It's not. When you grow up paying for everyone else's steak, you learn to keep your own tab small enough to walk away from. That morning, I was in my office reviewing a vendor contract for imported olive oil, the kind of Tuesday that makes you forget not everyone's life runs on spreadsheets and pars. My phone buzzed. I glanced down and felt something cold settle behind my ribs. 3 years of silence, and there it was. A notification from the group chat I'd been removed from the day I became the family's villain. Family had added me back. I stared at that notification for a full minute before I opened it. Family, the little red heart emoji my mother had picked out 6 years ago when she created the group, back when it was used for sharing Thanksgiving recipes and photos of Brooke's dog. I hadn't seen that heart in 3 years. The chat history was clean, nothing above my mother's newest message, which meant they'd either cleared it or, more likely, they had a second group without me the whole time. Mom's message was warm, careful, almost rehearsed. She said she and Dad had been doing a lot of reflecting and wanted to invite me to dinner at the Belvedere to start healing as a family. Just the 4 of us, she wrote. Her, Dad, me, and Brooke. A small dinner, a fresh start. Then a second message, 30 seconds later, with the line that should have told me everything. Family takes care of family, sweetheart. It's time we remembered that. Family takes care of family. She used to say that when I was 19, and she needed my server tips to cover the electric bill. She said it when I was 23, and Dad needed a co-signer on the truck. She said it when Brooke's first apartment fell through and I quietly paid the deposit. Family takes care of family had always meant one thing in my house. Diana takes care of family. I read the message twice. I noticed my mother hadn't said sorry. She hadn't said, "We were wrong." She'd said it was time to heal. Passive voice. No subject. No one responsible. I typed back, "I'll be there." Then I set my phone face down on the desk and went back to the olive oil contract, pretending my hands weren't shaking. 3 years ago, my sister Brooke decided to open a cafe. Not a business plan, not a market study. A cafe, because she'd seen one in Charleston with exposed brick and a matcha menu and thought, I could do that. She was 26, had never managed so much as a lemonade stand, and needed a $75,000 small business loan. The bank said yes, with a cosigner. That cosigner was supposed to be me. Mom called on a Sunday. Dad sat beside her, arms folded, already angry before I'd answered. Brooke needed the loan. The cafe was her dream. I had good credit, a stable job, a history of saying yes. Just sign the papers, Diana. I asked to see the business plan first. Brooke didn't have one. I asked about her projected margins, her lease terms, her supplier contracts. Brooke stared at me like I'd insulted her cooking. Mom's voice went flat. She's your sister. You don't need a spreadsheet to love your sister. I said no. Not because I didn't love Brooke, I did. But I'd spent enough years in the restaurant industry watching people pour savings into concepts with no foundation. And I knew what $75,000 of someone else's debt looks like at 3 a.m. when the cafe is dark and the loan is still due. Dad stood up. He pointed at the door and said the thing that closed it for 3 years. If you won't help this family, you're not part of it. I drove home. The next morning, I'd been removed from family. Nobody called. Nobody texted. For 3 years, I was the daughter who loved money more than her own sister. Here's the part that's hard to admit. The silence almost broke me. Not because they were right. I knew they weren't. Because I missed being needed. That's the real wound. And it took me 2 years and a therapist named Dr. Kwan to name it properly. I had been the family fixer since I was 17. First paycheck went to groceries. Tax refund went to Mom's dental work. When Dad's transmission blew, I paid for the rebuild and told him it was covered under warranty because I knew he'd never accept a handout from his 22-year-old daughter. When Brooke got married, I covered the florist, the photographer, and half the reception. And I smiled while Mom gave the toast about raising 2 strong girls. 2 strong girls. 1 bill. I didn't do it because I'm generous. I did it because I'd learned, somewhere around age 15, that the fastest way to keep the peace in my family was to make sure nobody had to ask twice. Ask once. Diana pays. Everyone's happy. Dinner is quiet. I trained them. I taught my parents that my wallet was a vending machine. Insert guilt, receive check. And when the machine finally said out of order, they didn't troubleshoot it. They unplugged it and walked away. So when Mom's message popped up after 3 years, family takes care of family, sweetheart, I felt the old reflex fire in my chest like a muscle I hadn't stretched in years. Go. Fix it. Pay whatever it costs. Make it quiet again. But I also heard Dr. Kwan's voice, steady as a metronome. You taught them you would always pay. That was your mistake to fix. Not by paying more, but by stopping. My coworker Jess told me not to go. She sat across from me at lunch the day after the invitation and said, Diana, this has ambush written all over it. And I remember laughing because Jess had never even met my family, and she could see it clearer than I could. My sous chef Marco said the same thing, shorter. Don't. But I'd already decided. Not because I believed them, not because I expected an apology. I wanted to sit across from my parents and find out whether 3 years had changed anything, or whether the silence had just been a longer version of the same conversation we'd always had, one where I was expected to listen, agree, and pay. I wanted closure, even if closure meant confirming the door was nailed shut. There was something else too, and I'm going to be honest about it because I think some of you will understand. I missed my mother. Not the mother who orchestrated, not the one who kept score, the one who taught me to make cornbread in a cast-iron skillet when I was 9 and sang along with Dolly Parton while the butter melted. That mother hadn't called in 3 years either, but some nights I still heard the Dolly Parton. So I told Jess I was going. I told Marco I'd be fine. I told myself the same thing and almost believed it. I set one rule. 1 dinner, civil, no money, and if it felt wrong, I'd leave before dessert. I wrote it on a sticky note and pressed it to my steering wheel the morning of. 1 dinner, then home. That sticky note was still there when I pulled into the Belvedere's parking lot and counted the cars. I dressed simple on purpose. Black slacks, a gray blouse I wear to vendor meetings, flat shoes. No jewelry except the small silver watch I bought myself the year I made regional director. Not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I'd earned it and it kept good time, and that felt like enough. I didn't want to walk into the Belvedere looking like I was performing. My family already thought I flaunted my success. The truth was, I drove a 9-year-old Honda and meal prepped on Sundays like half of America. The drive took 40 minutes. I played no music. My hands stayed at 10 and 2. Somewhere around the highway merge, my stomach started to tighten in a way I recognized. The same feeling I get when a walk-in cooler fails on a Friday night, and I know the next 6 hours are going to hurt. Instinct. My body knew something my brain was still negotiating with. I almost turned around at the exit ramp. Almost. But I thought about that cornbread, and I thought about Dr. Kwan's voice, and I kept driving. The Belvedere sat at the end of a strip of shops I hadn't visited in years. The expensive side of town, the kind of place where the parking lot is landscaped and the hostesses wear all black. Dad's truck was in the 3rd row, Mom's sedan next to it. Fine. Then I saw Aunt Linda's white Buick, Uncle Greg's SUV, Brooke's hatchback with the bumper sticker from the cafe that had closed 11 months after it opened. 3 more cars I recognized. 2 I didn't. My stomach dropped before I even opened the door. Just the 4 of us, Mom had written. I counted 9 vehicles. I sat in my car for 2 full minutes, engine off, hands on the wheel, reading that sticky note. 1 dinner, then home. The smart thing would have been to reverse out of the lot and drive the 40 minutes back to my condo and eat leftover soup, and never think about the Mayfield family reunion I hadn't been invited to, or apparently had been invited to without being told the guest list. But I got out. I straightened my blouse. I locked the car and walked toward the entrance because I was 32 years old and I'd spent 3 years learning how not to run, and I was not going to start running again in a restaurant parking lot on a Thursday evening. The front doors were heavy glass with brass handles, the kind that whisper, "Entrees start at $42," before you even see a menu. Inside, the lobby smelled like rosemary and warm bread and money. A hostess in a black dress smiled and checked her screen. "Mayfield?" I nodded. She nodded back. "Your party's already seated." She said it the way hostesses say things when they've been dealing with a large group for an hour and are trying very hard not to look stressed. I recognized the expression. I'd worn it myself 1,000 times. She grabbed a menu, just one, and led me toward the back of the dining room. I could hear them before I could see them. Laughter, clinking glasses, my Aunt Linda's unmistakable cackle cutting through the murmur of every other table. 1 dinner, then home. I turned the corner and saw the table. 16 chairs, every single one filled except the one at the far end, directly across from my father. The table stretched the entire length of the private dining alcove. White linen, heavy silverware, candles in low crystal holders. There were platters I could identify from 10 feet away, lobster tails fanned across crushed ice, wagyu sliders on a tiered stand, a charcuterie board the size of a coffee table. And in the center, a bottle of wine I recognized from vendor tastings. A 2016 Saint-Emilion Grand Cru, retail around $400, already half empty. They'd been here a while. They'd been ordering hard. The hostess paused at the edge of the alcove and glanced at me with a look that translated perfectly across every restaurant I've ever worked in. "Good luck." Then she leaned closer and said quietly, "Your father put a card down to hold the reservation, just so you know. We require one for parties over 12. I filed that sentence the way I file every operational detail, silently, completely, permanently. His card was on file. He'd secured the table. And yet, somehow I already knew the bill wasn't supposed to land on him. My mother saw me first. She stood up with both arms open and every head at the table turned. "Diana. Oh, sweetheart, look at you." Applause. Actual applause, like I was a returning soldier and not the daughter they'd ghosted for 1,000 days. Uncle Greg whistled. Aunt Linda dabbed her eyes with a cloth napkin. Brooke raised her wine glass and smiled the kind of smile that has teeth, but no warmth. 16 people, lobster and wagyu and a $400 bottle of Bordeaux. Just the 4 of us, Mom had written. I sat down. What else do you do when 16 people are watching you and the chair is already pulled out and a waiter is pouring water into your glass before your purse hits the floor? I sat down and I smiled because that's what 15 years of front-of-house training gives you, the ability to smile while your brain is running threat assessment at full speed. Mom settled back into her seat, beaming. We wanted it to be a surprise, the whole family together, just like old times. I thought it was just the four of us, I said. Mom waved her hand like she was swatting a fly. Well, once Linda heard, and then Greg, and then your cousin Tara. It just grew. You know how family is? I knew exactly how family was. I scanned the table. Dad sat at the head, carving a Wagyu slider like it was Thanksgiving turkey. Brooke sat to his left, phone in one hand, wine in the other, scrolling something I couldn't see. Aunt Linda and Uncle Greg anchored the middle. Cousins I hadn't spoken to since a Thanksgiving 5 years ago filled the rest. Tyler, Megan, Jake, 2 wives I'd met once, and Aunt Linda's neighbor who I'd never seen before in my life, but who was apparently eating lobster on whatever occasion this was. The wine was flowing. The platters were half demolished. They'd been here at least an hour before I arrived, and they'd ordered everything on the menu that didn't require a second mortgage. Mom leaned across and squeezed my hand. See? Family takes care of family. There it was again. The same 5 words, delivered with the same warm packaging, aimed at the same target. I squeezed back and said nothing. I was counting plates. My father is the kind of man who orders for the table. Not asks. Orders. He waved the waiter over, a young guy barely out of his teens who looked like he was running on caffeine and anxiety, and rattled off additions without glancing at a menu. Another round of the lobster tails, 2 more Wagyu plates, and bring another bottle of that Bordeaux, the Grand Cru, the good one. He said, the good one, loud enough for the tables on either side of us to hear. Dad pulled his credit card from his wallet and held it between 2 fingers like a magician showing the audience a coin before the trick. Put it all on this, he told the waiter. We're celebrating tonight. The waiter, his name tag read Nathan, scribbled and nodded, and disappeared toward the kitchen with the look of someone who desperately wanted a smoke break. I watched my father tuck the card back into his wallet with a little pat, the way you pat a dog that's performed well. Something was off. I'd grown up watching Dad argue over the price of a muffler. I'd seen him return a shirt because the sale tag was missing. Raymond Mayfield did not order $400 bottles of wine. He did not wave credit cards like flags. This was a performance, and it was aimed at me. Look how well we're doing, Diana. Look how little we needed you. Except the car in the parking lot was the same truck from 5 years ago with a dent in the rear quarter panel he'd never fixed. And Mom's handbag, the Coach purse she'd carried since I was in high school, sat on the chair beside her with a cracked strap held together by a safety pin. They were performing. I just didn't know the price of admission yet. The small cuts started around the second bottle. Aunt Linda leaned across Uncle Greg and said, "Must be nice, running all those fancy restaurants while the rest of us clip coupons." She laughed when she said it, the way people laugh when they want you to know they're serious. Cousin Megan asked if I ever felt guilty living so well while my parents were going through a rough patch. I didn't know about a rough patch. Nobody had told me about a rough patch. Brooke, without looking up from her phone, added, "She wouldn't know. She hasn't been around." Each comment landed with the precision of something rehearsed, not scripted exactly, but aligned, the way a choir finds the same note without a conductor. They'd been talking about me, about my absence, my money, my life. And they'd arrived tonight with a shared understanding of the story. Diana left. Diana has plenty. Diana owes. Aunt Linda delivered the thesis statement. She reached across the table, took my hand like she was comforting me at a funeral, and said, "Family doesn't keep score, dear." I almost laughed. Family doesn't keep score. This from a woman who once stopped speaking to her own daughter-in-law for 6 months over a Thanksgiving seating arrangement. I didn't laugh. I pulled my hand back gently and picked up my glass. Sparkling water. The only thing in front of me. The only thing I'd ordered. The contrast was almost funny. 16 people swimming in Lobster and Bordeaux, and me with a glass of San Pellegrino sitting at the end of the table like a designated driver at a bachelor party. Nathan, the young waiter, passed behind me and I caught his eye. "Just the water tonight?" he asked, quiet. "Just the water," I said. He nodded like he understood something I hadn't said out loud. "Let me tell you about Nathan." He was maybe 19 or 20, built thin the way restaurant kids are before they learn to eat between rushes. He moved fast but careful, the way new servers do when the table is too big and the order is too complicated and they know one wrong plate means a manager conversation they can't afford. I recognized everything about him because I'd been him. 17 years old, 2 tables deep, learning that the guests who snap their fingers are always the ones who tip the least. He was handling our 16 top alone. Well, almost alone. A busser appeared occasionally to clear plates, but Nathan was running every order, every refill, "Excuse me, can we get more butter?" from Aunt Linda, who'd said it 3 times in 20 minutes. He never complained. He never sighed. He refilled my sparkling water without being asked, and when he set the glass back down, he caught me watching the table with an expression I probably should have hidden better. "Long night?" he murmured. I almost told him the truth. Instead, I just said, "You're doing great." He blinked, startled, like he'd forgotten customers could say that. Then he straightened up about half an inch taller and moved on to Uncle Greg's refill. I watched him go and thought about the version of me that used to carry 4 plates up her forearm and cry in the walk-in freezer on the hard nights. That girl had no idea she'd end up on the other side of a table like this, sitting across from the family that made her into a fixer and a funder, being asked without being asked to write one more check. But she'd understand what I was about to do. She'd understand it perfectly. I excused myself to the restroom around the 40-minute mark. I needed 2 minutes without Aunt Linda's commentary and a door I could lock. The Belvedere's restroom was the kind with cloth hand towels and lavender soap and a full-length mirror that made you look slightly better than you felt, which was a neat trick considering I felt like I was digesting glass. I turned on the faucet, pressed cold water against my wrists the way you do when you